Okay. May I? So I should talk in front of the computer and. Okay, I have to. Okay, thank you very much, Luisa, for your kind presentation. So I knew that there are a few English native people, and both of you, I guess. Okay. It appears, really. I'm sorry for my not BBC pronunciation, of course, and I learned some English in Sheffield during my PhD, so I can pronounce soon funnel boost and how much. Okay, that's lovely. So
I'm from Sheffield.
You are from Sheffield. So
Sorry, later.
nearby. Okay, later on. Okay. So a piece of my heart is still there. A piece of my heart is still there. All the Peak District record collector in Broomhill. So I think most of my salary is there. Was there. Okay, so coming back to this morning, this afternoon presentation, it's about. As introduced. Oh dear. Have you got the one with? No. Okay, because I move my hands desperately, and okay. As you can see, you haven't heard about by Luisa. This talk will be related to the origin of homochirality. So chirality is a very well-known, feature of chemistry, technology, and life. Here, no, this one, okay. And so it is a well-known concept since the end of 19th century by Lord Kelvin. I heard that Kelvin is a river nearby the laboratory of Todd Thomson. His former name was Todd Thomson. That is a chiral, an object that cannot be superposed to its specular mirror images like the hands. Indeed, chirality comes from the Greek word Keir, yeah, okay, I'm not of literary studies, and that means hands. The American called chirality handedness, from hand, of course. Right, okay, and going further at molecular level, those are two examples of a chiral molecule. This is bromochloroiodomethane, in which the four different substituents make asymmetric the molecule, and as you can see, the two different enantiomers cannot coincide when they are superposed. And as this other example, if you have only two different substituents, it is unavoidably, a plane of symmetry, so this feature disappear. So chirality is, you can have also a molecular that is achiral, although some chiral centers are present. And it is a consequence of the presence of a particular element of symmetry that is called improper rotoreflection axis S4, commonly observed. So from the outer space, all the universe is chiral, is asymmetric, as we can see in these two different images of spiral galaxy, the NGC 1300 and so on. At 70 million light years in the Edenius constellation. This one is quite peculiar. Besides its spiral, so asymmetric structure, it has a corona, a circular a circular outer region that rotates in opposite sense. In the shear, in the friction region, there is a nursery of newborn stars, as can be spotted by the bright blue that are the new stars, and the hydrogen fluorescence upon irradiation from the X-ray emitting nucleus. Going further, I mean, in a small scale, in our planet, the common chiral object are the cyclones, which rotates in anti-clockwise fashion in the northern hemisphere and in clockwise way in the austral hemisphere. This is due to the well-known, I mean, Coriolis acceleration due to the rotation of our planet around its axis. So the Coriolis forces are deeply implied in the selection, I mean, following some theories that we'll check later on, in the selection of the specific chirality that on which are based all the biological fundamental molecules, like, for example, amino acids. Right, okay, going further in the microscopic scale, chiral objects are commonly encountered, as for example in the helical coiling of the grapevine stems by phototropism, or this is the Roman cauliflower with this brilliant, beautiful fractal structure, which appears in anti-clockwise, always in anti-clockwise form. In the going further on the evolution scale, I mean, so for Aminifera unicellular species, the coiling of the shell depends strictly of the kinetic of the biomineralization process, which is selected by the temperature of the surrounding environment. So left coiled shell has been found in the Arctic region, otherwise the right one, the clockwise spiraling, is found in the more hot temperature and the tropical ones. So this is a story that maybe is familiar in England. This is Tomo. That is the mate of the famous Jeremy snail. Jeremy snail that was a 1 in a million lefty coiled specimen, which was so all the briefly, a parenthesis. All the snails are found commonly in a dextro-rotatory fashion, as in this example. And matching with this chiral counterpart, we can say that is impossible for spherical meaning, because all the internal organs are displaced. And there was a public call on BBC Radio 4 for finding a mate for Jeremy. This is Tomo, that was found in Ipswich Town, if I don't remember. If I remember well. And this is one of the offspring that, as the others, are dextro-rotatory, as commonly observed. Right. The fundamental, importance of the chirality in life, has been recognized by Louis Pasteur, a young, at time, of course, crystallographer, who was able to separate the two enantiomer of tartaric acid, not by hand with how it's called, pinch, tweezer, but by crystallographic fashion, of course. And later on, they discovered that all the molecules of biological importance, for example, amino acid or sugars, have specific chirality. L for the amino acid according to the Fisher notation, and D for the sugar. And he stated that all the universe is not symmetric, is symmetric. There should be a cause for that. Going more inside, more the definition states that the homochirality, so all the objects with the same asymmetry, are a fingerprint of life. And this is quite easily understood by considering a simple, the smallest peptides chain possible, made by two elements, either D or L configuration. The combination for two elements are already 4, so they obey to the exponential law. If you have two center of asymmetry, so you have two elevated, two N stereo isomers, most of you would recognize. In a small biological molecule, the hemoglobin, the protein structure is composed by more than 500 amino acids, and so 2 to 500 is something very big, not mentioning the chromosome 1 of the human being, that contains more than millions and millions of sugar in the bases, in the coupling bases. So the large variety of combination makes virtually impossible the exact matching for replication and the continuation of life. Right, we can feel the chirality with our senses. So we are composed by asymmetric molecules, not only sugar and of course amino acid, but many others. For example, one of the enantiomers of this terpenoid derivative for plus carbon scents like cumin, whereas is enantiomeric form like smells of peppermint, as well as the terpenoid limonene. The S form is found in the peel. No, la buccia is peel. Okay. Zest. Is it? It's not just skin. Zest is more German. Okay. In the skin of lemons, okay, and the orange, is rich. The orange peel, the orange skin is rich in our limonene. So, going further, many pharmaceutical compounds are chiral because the receptor of the biological active sites are chiral. This is an example of a pheromone for the fighting against the insects in the agricultural field. Some other examples are constituted by ephedrine. One enantiomer is active, is anti-asthma, anti-pain on the back, and so on. The other, the specular sister or brothers is inactive, as well as the L-DOPA, which is employed for the relief of the Parkinson disease. The counterpart is simply inactive. But I mean, it is an infamous case in which one enantiomer of thalidomide is a drug that was given to pregnant women for releasing the morning sickness during the pregnancy. The air form is active, but unfortunately during the metabolic part in vivo, it can be transformed quite fast in its opposite chiral molecule, which is strongly mutagenic, causing phocomelia, as can be seen in this picture of the newborn child. So it was commercialized as a Tensival Distaval during the end of the 1950s, early 1960s. This is a brochure claiming that the health of your child depends on your well-behaving, and then you should trust the activity of the thalidomide. So phocomelia comes from the Greek phoke, in Italian foca, seal. So phoke in Greek is a fin, like the arms of the seal, or the arms, of fishes. So how? The homochirality has been selected. There are two main theories. This is according to science. One of the still most important of 125 a question of fundamental of science. And because it's a strong, deep relation to life. So there are two theories. One is based on a chance, on a stochastic event, and this theory require a subsequent step of chiral amplification of an initially randomly selected specimen. The other theory that is gaining more appeal is based on the presence of a specific cause. So it's based on a deterministic effect, in which the first stage of mirror symmetry breaking is the crucial step. So going to the chance theory, you can see that by tossing a dice, it is called dice, okay, a dice, the most likely event is you have 50 and 50% of end of even or odd scores. But mathematically you can observe that there is a dispersion of the results, so a standard deviation that comprises all the scores colored in red. That unfortunately is that naturally are proportional to the square roots of the mean of the number of throwing of scores. And if you think in a 1 molar scale with a number of Avogadro molecules, the random deviation from the exact enantiomeric balances from the two species is nearly zero. You may have an excess or something that more than 100 billion of molecules L, for example, with respect to the S. So the step of chiral amplification, one of the many, I mean, that can be considered, is related to the vortex effect of the sea waters as a consequence of the Coriolis forces. You may argue that, I mean, as the Earth is symmetric, more molecules that should be amplified in the austral half of the planet should be counterbalanced by the opposite molecule born in the northern hemisphere. But we have to take in mind that around the selection of the life, and so the selection of the Homo chirality around 3.8 billion years, the geological structure of the emerged lands were completely different from the present ones. This is the imaging of the supercontinent Valbara that show different disposition of the inner land waters. We are to remind that the life is born in the fresh waters, and then subsequently there was an inhabitation of the seas. Okay, experimentally it has been proved a few years ago, but this is a matter of speculation till now. I mean, in laboratory by a scientist, Joan-Henri Ribot from the University of Barcelona, who was able to obtain large aggregates of porphyrin. This is a skeleton of porphyrin, a synthetic macrocycle that is strongly related to the heme group, hemoglobin, or chlorophyll, and so on. Vitamin B, the choline skeleton, and then he was able to select a specific oil by simply changing the rotation verse of this. I mean, this is rotavapor. I don't know if Sheffield is called also rotavapor. Maybe, I don't know, I don't remember. From the typical circular dichroism plots, you can see the different imaging fingerprint of the macromolecule obtained. This is a cartoon from a crystallographic imaging. So, this is those are represented the ribbons that are coiled in a dextro-rotatory way or left-handed way as a consequence of the different sense of rotation. If the solution of the supramolecular aggregates are maintained still, you have a sort of, macaroni fettuccine-like structure with not a specific sense. Okay, the deterministic theory comes from the concept that the nature itself is asymmetric. By solving this very simple, quantum mechanical operator equation, I'm joking, and I'm just able to look at the pictures, okay? Well, this is the Hamiltonian operator for energy. Okay? This is the pairing function of the symmetry of the object. Okay, there is a difference in energy if you have a lefty molecule with respect to a dextral one. This comes out an important fundamental experiment by Professor Wu in the Standard Laboratory of Weight and Measurements in Washington in 1965 on the radioactive decay of cobalt to nickel emission of electrons, so beta rays, gamma rays, X rays, and antineutron that all of them had a specific minus spin. Okay, so the spin, the aligning of the intrinsic magnetic moment of these subatomic particles is counter-aligned from the main magnetic vector in which all the product of the decay reaction are collected. This difference of energy is rather small. For one molecule, no, from a mole, it's about 1/1,000,000 of billion, but it increases steadily, exponentially with the atomic number and with the dimension of the molecules, arriving to something to 10 to minus 10 in the case of osmium or rhenium. For example, those two paradigmatic molecules, fluoro, bromo, chloro, methane, the S is the S, an enantiomeric form, is less stable, is more stable, but by this tiny difference from one with respect to the R counterpart. Okay, so this is very small, but is enormously is of enormous significance. So one proof of this, a selection of chirality can be found, origin of the selection of chirality can be found in the polarized light that can be commonly observed in the sky. For example, in the Orion Nebula, this is the Orion constellation that is still visible in the night. Down on the right, this is Betelgeuse, a red giant star, whose that dimension would arrive if it is would placed in the place of Sun, it would arrive more or less around Jupiter. This is Bellatrix, so the sister of Harry Potter, or what, Bellatrix, I guess. So the woman who fights. This is the Latin name. This is a re-eagle that actually is a tribal star. Is a tribal star. If you follow the belt of the Orion, this is a hunter. This is the chain constellation we see Sirius. Okay, you arrive to Aldebaran in Taurus, and then if you go from Rigel to Betelgeuse, you arrive on to the constellation of Gemini. Okay, that's why the soundtrack at the beginning posed by my colleague. The Orion Nebula is a source of circularly polarized light by effect of magnetic field and interstellar dust scattering. The scattering is not isotropic but is anisotropic, so it has a directional vector. So why the CPL, the circularly polarized light, should select one form with respect to another one? Well, this happens every day in our planet by the combination of the electromagnetic radiation from the sun interacting with the oxygen molecule or with the magnetic field of our planet. There is a source of around 0.5% of polarization. Well, it's interesting to know that by the rotation sense of our planet, down there is a slight percent of increase of the left-handed polarization that may end up in the photo decomposition of L amino acid. It has been proved on the laboratory scale. Well, during the sunset, there is an increase of the air polarization, which will destroy preferentially the air-handed amino acid. Well, okay, so there is a parity, there is a balance. No, because in the morning there is a kinetic resolution of the racemic mixture. In the morning, the temperature of the waters are lower, okay? And so the kinetic of the decomposition is lower. Whereas at night the water temperature are high, and so are higher, and so the decomposition is faster. Convective motions accumulate on the bottom of the ocean the saved with slight excess of L amino acid. If you imagine a billion and billion of years, of accumulation of selective accumulation, we may accept that the residual actual configuration is based on L. It has been kept in mind that around 3-4 billion years there was inclusion of the moon on the gravitational attraction of the Earth, and so it caused the insurgence of the tidal movement, which has been claimed to help the conservation of the selected enantiomer. Okay, just by finishing, I don't know if I am on time. there were about 20 slides that have been erased for matter of timing. So the chirality in life, not mentioning all the pharmaceutical aspects, of course, is something that we cannot live without it. Just by keep in mind, just by thinking at the stereoselective synthesis and production of the polypropylene by using the proper solid state titanium-based catalyst, it is possible to select the stereochemistry of the carbon units, selecting the kind of polypropylene to be obtained. In this case, isotactic. Iso means all the methyl groups on the same side. Syndiotactic, alternating position. Atactic, completely random. Well, each structure confers particularly rheological, technical, mechanical feature in terms of melting point, solubility, resistance to the temperature, thermoplastic or thermoendurant ability to the polymer. The Moplen is one of the most employed trademark. It is a synthesis from Montecatini Edison, one of the most important in the past chemical industry in Italy, collapsed in the ENI National Agency of Hydrocarbons. Now is appeared for political reason, and the plan that is polypropylene. The most aged of us, me in primis, would remind the commercial with Gino Bramieri. The slide has been erased, unfortunately. So I hope that this has been given. Important to mention that the authors, the scientists that were, that discovered the stereoselectivity of the polymerization reaction was Professor Ziegler from Mülheim, from the Max Planck Institute of Mülheim, and Giulio Natta on the left-hand side from the Politecnico in Milan, and the only Nobel Prize in Chemistry, Italian Nobel Prize in Chemistry that were honored by the Nobel medal in '63. And that's all, folks, and thank you very much for your kind attention and patience. Bye. Question time? No question? Okay, I need to. Okay, I'm joking. Okay.
So, thank you for your presentation.
Grazie for your invitation.
So, Marco.
Yeah, I have a question. Do you think that during the development of life and macromolecules, what was the role of metals? Do you think some of the stereospecificity is due to metals?
Well, the original version of this lengthy was more, intense. Okay, I will arrive it. Thank you for, your. Okay, how come si fa a deselezionare la
Lascia così,
cosa?
guarda.
Okay. It appeared. Okay, was on my back. In nature, I mean, there are many crystal chiral form or many simple molecule like quartz, a polymer of silicium dioxide that can be found in the two crystallographic structure according to the coiling of the infinite bonds, carbon, silicium, oxygen. By precipitating a saturated solution of calcium or sodium perchlorate, you will end up in a random mixture of two different crystallographic chiral sample as indicated by the different color under polarized light. Okay, oh dear. We have half an hour more, yeah, okay. Good, and where is it? There should be. Is one. Okay, one of the mechanisms based on chiral sources for amplification is this is a Nobel Prize SOI for chemistry, who found that tiny unbalancing of chiral species may act as autocatalytic species, ending with one specific enantiomer with an enantiomeric excess virtually one. Okay. So one can be one mechanism of amplification. The reaction of SOI works very well with many chiral inductors like CPL, so circularly polarized light, like in the universe or in our atmosphere, on quartz, on sodium chlorate as before, or other chiral agent. But it is another important sources of chiral molecule from the time capsules, so the meteorite. This is an example of the Murchison meteorite that fell in a region of Murchison in Australia around the 60s. This is a carbonaceous chondrite, so a meteorite particularly rich in water and carbon-based material. By analyzing the contents of amino acid, there is clear an excess of the L form or of all the amino acid that has been found and has been synthesized on the outer space. The how are called the comets. The comets are biolaboratories, and so they brought not only water in our planet after the Archean, the very hot primordial evolution stage, but they brought also the molecules of life. So formaldehyde, ammonia, and also amino acid. They would act as a template for replication and selection. Okay, so one may argue that when it pass through our atmosphere, their temperature increase. Okay, the temperature increase, and they form a adiabatic surface that preserve intact the material that is presented in the core. Moreover, all the amino acids found, this is maybe not a case, are alpha-methyl amino acid. So they are very robust and inert toward the racemization. Okay, so one can be one possible answer to your interesting question. What is it? Alanina undergo racemization with a tau with a half-time rate of about 75,000 years in normal ambient, and then it is used as a paleontological marker for determining the ages of the shells, for example, I don't know, Glycimeris and so on, from the Eocene and onward.
I have a question. I have a curiosity. You described the different effects caused by the chirality of the molecule, but why we have this big different effect caused by the same molecule and that change only for different conformation?
Yeah, sure. Because all our enzymes, they work on the as stated by Fischer by a K-lock principle, left-handed. So you cannot. You may want to wear left shoes in your right foot and your left shoes. So those two objects are chiral. They do not fit. So you will end up with pain after a few time, after a few minutes. But a molecule is not recognized properly, and so cannot start all the biological cascade of reaction. So you cannot insert a K in the wrong way.
Yeah, but not only in the organism, also in the other mechanism, in the heart, for example.
In the heart?
In the other situation, not only.
So so chirality, the Homo chirality has been selected mainly on the living organisms. Can live safely if the quartz of the sun is L or R. Unless we want to use them as a catalyst for making L or R molecule, as exemplified before. This is the meaning of this talk is to point out the importance of chirality in the evolution of the biology, of the living systems. But all the universe. There is a sentence quite nice by Feynman, Nobel lecture for physics in 75, if I don't remember wrong, that he said maybe quite surely the only object that goes in clockwise directions are the clocks. So yeah. So all the other objects. So the nature is intrinsically chiral. Because the weak forces mediated by bosons in the subnuclear particles are asymmetric. hope to have been able to fully answer your complicated question. Okay, you are not convinced. Okay.
That will not make jokes.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Are viruses chiral or achiral?
Well, maybe intentionally. Well, they are constituted by RNA.
Depends on the virus. Could be DNA.
Yeah, it depends on the
RNA,
virus. Okay,
proteins.
but also a non-chiral object should be transformed in a chiral. Imagine those two, if they were equal, it has a plane of symmetry. But if you restores is one, is chiral. This is anti-clockwise. It has a minus or L or lambda structure. This is a R structure. So also the coiling of the proteins on the surface of the tobacco virus are left-handed. To be an object chiral, it depends on the complexity, and there are some objects that are more chiral than other one. For example, a cauliflower is more chiral than an amino acid, owing to its fractal structure. Okay.
Any other question or curiosity? So thank again, Donato.
Grazie a voi, grazie
Maybe
a
see
lui.
you next week, I don't know, by
Because I feel a bit of corona virus.
Okay.
I don't know if the coronavirus is chiral because all the protuberances are called are different. Because
We'll be invited at the arena. Chile. Not the expert.
I'm an expert on coronavirus. I don't know.
Okay. So I don't know if we will see you next week by streaming or Skype. I don't know.
It's, next week it will be easier because it's already on Skype.
Yes.
So we can transmit
La
the
prossima volta,
Skype.
per favore. Scherzo. Skype, no scherzo. Okay. So thank you.
Grazie a voi. Grazie.
Come?
Ci ho messo tanto.
Sì.
Sì?
Adesso
Ho sperato.
non lo so.
Che ore sono? Ci ho messo troppo.
Del mezzogiorno.
Ah, quindi perfetto.
Perfetto.
Sì.
Visto che non possiamo stringerci la mano.
Ma vabbè, oddio.
A distanza.
Facciamo come come Frankenstein Junior.
Un attimo.
Grazie soprattutto per averci fatto capire. Guarda.
Infatti,
Vabbè,
grazie.
beati voi, io ancora non so.